My name is Jack Kitteredge, and my wife Julie Rawson. We're here to give a talk about some of the work we've been doing on developing a no-till method of organic farming that we're happy with in Massachusetts. We have Many Hands Organic Farm, which is about in the center of the state of Massachusetts, so it has very similar climate and soil, I'm sure, conditions to what you guys have down here. And we've been there, we bought our land in 1980, we moved in 1982, and we started our farm, I guess you say commercially, started selling commercially at any scale at all in 1984. So we got certified in 1987, and certified organic since then. So we've been at it for quite a while, and went through some ups and downs, raised our family there. Pretty typical, I think, small organic farm in New England. So we have a lot of that kind of background. And we recently got interested about 5 years ago because of obviously climate change and the problems of that, got interested in the role that soil and farming can play in that. And that's basically what we feel like we have something to say about, ways in which the soil can be helpful in dealing with climate change, as well as we can do a better job of farming as a result of that. There's some seats on both sides here to that if you're not happy with them. There's some.
I'm the IMS technician. I was just wondering if everything was okay.
Yes.
Is everything good?
Yes.
We're all set. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. What we're going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit, running through the beginning of our PowerPoint, on the relationship between climate change and farming and the soil, the way proper treatment of soil can deal with some of the problems that climate change is presenting and alleviate some of the problems. And then Julie's going to talk about the more practical, how to do it on your farm, things you can do that are affordable and accessible and will result in better farming practices and better farming crops for you. So if that's what you're interested in, hopefully we'll be able to help you out and give you that. Hopefully we'll have a little time for questions at the end, but I think if you have a question about a particular point that just wasn't made, didn't hear it, didn't connect it with it, if you just sing out, raise your hand, or say, explain that again or something, I think it's probably, we're a small enough group that would be a useful thing to do, and probably you get a better answer that way right away than trying to wait for us to get to the end of our show and remember what the problem was. Okay. Basically, everybody's noticed the extreme weather that we have been having. I think it's less and less in question, and more people are beginning to accept that, yes, climate change is a reality we have to deal with. The short explanation for why climate change is a problem is that we have this thing called the greenhouse effect, which is that carbon dioxide and other what they call heat trapping gases, which are gases that do not reflect back to space all the heat energy that they receive radiated from the Earth. Those gases, because of their particular molecular structure, have that property, and other gases do not. And primarily it's carbon dioxide, with things like methane is also another heat trapping gas, and we have really 6 or 8 of them that we have to think about dealing with. And they basically, as you can see, the sunlight comes into the Earth, comes through the atmosphere, hits the Earth, bounces back from the Earth as long wavelength heat radiation, and is trapped by these gases indicated by that sort of halo around the Earth, and are reflected back to the Earth as heat rather than going out to space. And everybody probably knows most of that because it's been talked about so much. And obviously the climate change, the amount of carbon dioxide and other gases in the atmosphere has changed over time. This is a chart of the last 800,000 years, and most of that data is taken from ice core readings, but some is actually from the more recent stuff from Mauna Loa, the observatory in Hawaii. But basically, what you see there is the peaks and troughs of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. So you can get a sense of the fluctuations over time And of course, on the very extreme right, you see that where the blue arrow is going, that's the reading that have happened over the last few years. And you can see how that has accelerated than anything that's happened in human history. The unit that is measured in is carbon dioxide parts per million in the atmosphere. And right now they're about 400, a little past 410, I think, parts per million carbon dioxide. And the average when we, I think the peak at points in our evolution was something like 285. And so 400 is quite a bit beyond that, and it's pretty indicates a serious problem for us. Yeah.
Where's that average eating?
Well, it looks like your computer might have gone, did it kind of go to sleep?
How do you deal with that, you know?
Just touch a button, maybe. Yeah, there you go. Easy.
Okay, see where we are here, right? Okay. Good, thank you. So if you can kind of wake it up like they used to do people in church for a while.
Yeah.
And most of that carbon dioxide is here because of man's activities. That's called anthropogenic. It is caused by man. It's that term that's tossed around for anthropogenic climate change. And most of that is coming from emissions from burning carbon and other sources of fossil fuels. But even though 2/3 or so of those emissions come from burning of fossil fuels, as much as 1/3 of those emissions actually come from exposure of soil to the atmosphere. And I didn't realize this until we studied this a little bit more. But since the beginnings of agriculture, they have actually measured through various methods, ice core data and other things, that the carbon in the atmosphere has actually begun to increase since Mesopotamia and the beginnings of agriculture back there. And what happens is you expose soil. Nature covers soil very, very quickly and very completely with living matter. But when you begin farming and you till that under, you expose large portions of soil, you're basically exposing carbon in the soil to oxygen in the atmosphere. And as most of you know, probably, oxygen is a very quick response gas. It tends to oxidize things very quickly, and it will quickly take the carbon on the surface of the soil, join with it, make carbon dioxide, and go off into the atmosphere, taking the carbon out of the soil and into the atmosphere, where it contributes to climate change. So about 1/3 of our emissions are actually from land clearing and in agricultural use. And you can see what's going on, obviously, as you have bigger and bigger tillage equipment, the problem gets much more serious and happens more quickly. So even if we, the truth of the matter is more serious than they present usually in your understanding of climate change. Even if we stop burning all fossil fuels, stop emissions tomorrow, we would still have a very serious problem. The Earth would be continuing to heat because these gases that are already in the atmosphere have a half-life, and they probably average somewhere about 100 years. So for the next 100 years, we'd still be adding heat to the atmosphere, even though we all, turned into do-gooders and stopped burning any fossil fuel. We still have a serious problem. You say carbon dioxide, decay anywhere from 30 to 95 years. Methane, 12 years. Nitrous oxide, one of the worst of them, decaying 112 years. And oceans, which are right now absorbing a huge amount of that carbon from the atmosphere, will begin to slowly give off that heat as the opportunity presents itself. And since 1865, an amazing statistic, oceans have absorbed 300 zetajoules of man-made heat, which is an equivalent to a Hiroshima-style bomb every second for the last 150 years. Isn't that incredible? It gives you some sense of the kind of scale that we're talking about in heat dynamics on the Earth. That heating that's going to continue for the next 100 years, even if we stop emitting tomorrow, will melt the Arctic ice, continue to melt the Arctic ice, continue with sea level rises, and add heat to the air as warm water, rises to the surface. Arctic permafrost will melt, causing release of quantities of methane that's been frozen, and the digestion of large amounts of soil carbon by soil life as things heat, and that digestion is going to cause them to exhale more carbon dioxide. So not to be particularly, scary, but basically the problem is if we stop all emissions, we really haven't dealt with this problem for climate change in our generation or our children's generation. It's going to continue, and we have something further we have to do as a result. So what can we do? We basically have to remove carbon dioxide from the air that we put there, not just stop emitting it, but actually bring some back, draw down from the air, put it somewhere. And if we can take away 100 gigatons of carbon, that monstrous number, but that's the number we would take, it would get us back to 350 parts per million, which it was when I was, a youngster, when I was in college, I believe. And we need really to get 250 gigatons of carbon to get us all the way back to 280, which is where we were when we evolved, and that's sort of what most experts think is the ideal level for us to get it back to. So the question is, how do we get it out of the air, and where do we put it once we get it? That's a huge amount of material. Where we put it, there are basically two places. You can put it in the ocean, or you can put it in the soil. If you take it out of the atmosphere, we don't have any other huge sinks for that on this planet. The ocean is not a good answer because we've already put way too much in the ocean, and we need to. That is causing acidification, is killing soil, ocean life, coral life, and other organisms are dying rapidly, and that's heating up, and we really need to take it out of the atmosphere so that the oceans can give some of that heat off back into the atmosphere, and then we can continue to take it out of the atmosphere. And the only place left to put it is into soil. And fortunately, that's where that carbon came from in the first place. So it doesn't take a soil biologist, you don't have to be too smart to figure out that if you took it from one place, that's where you should put it back again when you're fussing with nature. And the agricultural part of the story is very hopeful because that carbon that causes the greenhouse effects came out of the soil as fossil fuels, as coal, oil, gas, and as the carbon that was in soil. Second, adding carbon to the soil is something that we're very good at, and we do it as farmers because it builds healthy and abundant crops, so we should be doing it. Basically, soil carbon is the key to life on Earth. On the side, it's the basic food for all our life. We're all carbon-based organisms, as you're certainly aware, and carbon is what all of us eat. It also keeps soil hydrated. An acre of soil stores over 20,000 gallons of water for each 1% of carbon it contains. I know a couple of years ago when we had issues of drought and also of flooding in Worcester County where we farm, a lot of the farms were not able to continue that summer. And we found it was difficult. We were able to continue because we had been adding carbon to the soil long enough that it served as sort of a reservoir. When there was too much water, it soaked it in and held the soil, held the water. When there was not enough, it began to give it back up. And that proved very helpful to us. And it's one of the things that you can immediately benefit from when you start putting carbon into your soil. Originally, many soils on Earth were 10% or more carbon. And this is the kind of world in which we evolved. Now, how do we get that carbon into the soil? There are lots of, geoengineering schemes that involve big machines and lots of energy and very expensive that talk about storing, blowing carbon back into substances that will absorb it in the soil and so forth. But there is, in fact, a very simple process that maneuvers massive amounts of carbon into the soil for no cost, and is already doing it, and that is working with the natural system called photosynthesis. And basically, I'm sure you all learned about this in high school or college or something. Plants take in carbon dioxide and oxygen. Taking carbon dioxide and water as the two inputs into their basic system. The carbon dioxide is made up of carbon and oxygen, and water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. And those molecules exist because they're more compact form than they existed as natural free atoms. And it takes energy to break a molecule into the free atoms again. And how does plants get that energy? They get it from the sun. That's what photosynthesis does. It uses the energy of the sun to break those molecules, water into hydrogen and oxygen, carbon dioxide into carbon and oxygen. And then it recombines them takes the hydrogen and the carbon and makes carbohydrates, and takes the oxygen and the oxygen and makes free oxygen, which it releases. So isn't it nice? Plants are making carbohydrates, the exact thing that all the rest of the world needs to eat, and oxygen, all the stuff that most of us breathe, as a free product of nature. And this is not just an interesting fact, this is a big deal. Plants all over the world are doing this continually, and in fact the numbers are amazing. Something like 15% of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere worldwide comes out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, goes into plants, and goes into either the plant's biological life and uses energy for that, or goes into the soil, which is the other place it can go. And the more we encourage photosynthesis, the more of that carbon we're going to get to go into the soil. Now, exactly how does that work? A little more detail. Basically, soil is full of carbon-digesting organisms, microbes of all sorts, bacteria, fungi, other kinds of things like that. And they're very hungry, and they are constantly looking for carbonaceous materials to consume, because that's what's going to sustain them, and they're going to be able to survive. Otherwise, they're going to go into some kind of cyst-like form or suspended animation, and eventually they will die. So soil is hungry, and plants and microbes over the 4 billion years or so that the Earth has existed, and the 2 billion or something that they have all existed, have made a basic deal. Bacteria, fungi, and the other soil organisms use their abilities, which they have evolved to help plants, give those abilities to the use of plants in exchange for carbohydrates. And the plants supply those carbohydrates to those organisms because it's easier for it to get what it needs by essentially hiring services from these organisms than growing the root structures and so forth that it would have to do to sustain itself without this symbiosis. And this is the part of that I didn't learn in soil biology or in high school biology, and I doubt that many people here did. It's been a known fact for a long time, but I don't think it's ever been pushed in people popular understanding. To understand that symbiosis is really the key to building soil structure and soil health. So how do the plants get those carbohydrates to the microbes to start this process going? They simply exude them through their roots. The healthier a plant is, the more carbon it's going to exude as basically a sugary sap out through its roots to the very, very small, thin area surrounding all the root structures called the rhizosphere. And in that rhizosphere, you could actually taste a little, section of that, it would actually taste somewhat sweet. It's almost like, not sweet as maple syrup, obviously, but it's the same principle. You've got carbohydrates and sap. So that rhizosphere is very sweet, has carbon, attracts lots of organisms. It's the richest area anywhere on Earth in terms of density of living organisms in a small area, that small area around roots. The carbon attracts those organisms eat it, they like it, they want more. They understand in their way that stronger plants exude more carbon. They have evolved ways to help those plants become stronger, and the more microbes are attracted to come to the feast, the stronger those plants become. And plants, being nature's only source of food, have a monopoly basically on this process. And you could look at it as if microbes, bacteria, or other organisms are farming the plants, or you could look at it like the plants are farming the organisms and getting services from them. It's a very beneficial symbiosis in both ways. Okay, what are the microbes? How do they do this? How do they help the plants? Basically, there are two kinds that are really important. One is, bacteria, which are incredible chemical magicians. They really are. People may have heard of mitochondria in human bodies. That's those little power plants in every cell that make ATP, which is the way that we humans and most organisms generate energy that we live in our metabolism. Those were originally freestanding microbes that we incorporate into our cells to do that process. So we are actually surviving on the ability of microbes to bacteria in this case, to generate energy. If you go into those cells in your body and take those mitochondria out and look at their DNA, it's totally different DNA. It's not the DNA that you or I have in our body. It's not what we reproduce with. It's from totally different bacteria. And so we have this other organism, much like we have, organisms living in our gut. We've got these organisms actually living in every cell, which are not human, but we have incorporated into them and we have colonized, essentially. But that's just one example of the many things that bacteria do. And there's a world of understanding that I think the next generation is going to learn about what bacteria can do. In fixed nitrogen, for instance, you know the importance of fixing nitrogen. Most of the atmosphere is nitrogen, but plants can't access it directly. They need to have it fixed by some process. Nitrogen will do it for free in legumes or in other situations. Most fertilizer is made out of atmospheric nitrogen by using a heavy energy process that was invented a couple hundred years ago, but that's very intensely energetic and you waste fossil fuels again, and bacteria can do this very directly. They can synthesize plant phytohormones, they can solubilize phosphate from rock. Another thing that plants need soluble phosphate they can take up. Phosphate is very hard to get. Bacteria can solubilize it on the surface of rock and put it and make it available, produce natural antibiotics and fungicides and many, many other things. Just a sense of that. Fungi are the other primary microbe that is actively involved in this process. Its special strength is it's these filamentous threads, you might say. If you find if you were to dig a hole in the soil and find a little area that looks almost like cotton or something, you can see these thousands and thousands of little hyphae, these little white, almost microscopic threads. That's essentially the fungi. They reproduce, many of them, through things called mushrooms, and that produces the spores, and that's how we primarily think of fungi, but that's only the reproductive organ of this very complex filamentous organism. And the best I could think of to illustrate this is something like a mop or a network of hairs. And basically that's an illustration of the ability of these things to rapidly reach out and find nutrients in soil. In this case, it's finding phosphate on the surface of rocks. Again, the same phosphate, which is very hard for plants to solubilize and make available. The fungi exert enzymes that can, in fact, solubilize that. They also can transport water from underground, tiny rivulets and streams and so forth, sources of water. They solubilize that phosphate, pass it through water along to the plant roots. That plant grows, very strong because it's got that kind of ability that otherwise it would have to somehow, grow a root to actually be in physical contact with that rock, grow another root to be in physical contact with that water. It's getting the services of that fungi to actually combine that stuff and deliver it to the doorstep just for a little bit of carbohydrates. So you can see the benefit that occurs to the plant. Basically, they can solubilize these minerals. They produce humus. Fungi produce humus to form a stable carbon. That is the primary way, one of the primary ways that we actually build soil carbon, through encouraging the growth of these fungal networks. They transport minerals and water along these hyphae to roots. They produce glomalin. This was just discovered 25 years ago or so, a glycoprotein which binds soil aggregates together. If you've seen healthy soil, seen a shovel full of or something, you've probably seen these little clumps, I guess you'd say, of soil. They're about the size of a raisin or so. Soil isn't this fine powder, it's this really textured thing that has these clumps, and the healthier the soil is, the more aggregates it will have. These aggregates are, among other things, the clean room in which bacteria do some of their functions. If bacteria can exclude oxygen, can exclude water and so forth from some of their chemical processing, they can do it much more efficiently. And that's in fact what they do, is these nodules on legumes and so forth are involved in protecting bacteria while they're fixing nitrogen. Same thing with glomalin. It holds these soil aggregates together so that the bacteria can do their biochemistry. So basically there's numbers of other organisms in the soil. Bacteria and fungi are the primary ones, but there's lots of other ones that function, need the carbon that plants have, and found ways to help plants grow and thrive and thus get more carbon. the things that, the way this relates to us as farmers is the basic rules we take away from this. First of them is minimize tillage. The more you tear up the soil, the more you destroy the fungal networks, their physical networks, of threads of hair. You go through there with lots of tillage and turning the soil and so forth, and you're shredding those and you're killing them. So that's the important thing. You're also exposing that soil to oxidation, as we talked about how exposed soil, is the carbon is quickly picked up by the oxygen and lost into the atmosphere. Additional things that farmers care about, it creates plow pans, destroys soil aggregates, and finally creates we have found creates a huge flush of annual weeds that we have found we don't have to have anymore now that we don't do tillage. So if only one major thing you want to take away is some real advantages of no-till farming. This is one of the key things that we have to do. And organic farmers, are great about not using chemicals, but they're not so great about tillage. We do use a lot of tillage, and it was a real struggle on our farm to find ways to minimize tillage, and that's the part Julie's going to talk about shortly, how we can do that. Well, I guess I'm too boring.
Yeah, faster.
Okay, another thing besides minimizing tillage is keep land covered with green plants. If you go out in the Midwest in the winter, you see huge expanses of acreage that are just brown. That soil has been exposed to the sun, to the air. That carbon is wafting off all winter long. No protection is provided there. To use cover crops, to extend the season to keep green plants growing, to use mulches, other kinds of ways you can basically put a barrier between the soil and the atmosphere. Ideally a living barrier that's producing more carbon for the soil, but if you can't do that, at least a physical barrier like mulch or something that's preventing that carbon from venting into the atmosphere. So basically, you can see that on the right you've got some nice good litter cover, and on the left you don't. Obviously not to use chemicals. Obviously, if you're using fungicides and pesticides, you're actually killing the organisms that are potentially the ones that are going to make your plants healthier, and that's crazy. But also, even if you're using synthetic chemicals, you're using the things to provide the life to the plant that could be provided by those organisms in the soil. And it's not an altruistic relationship that's between the plants and the microbes. It's an economic relationship. The plant is doing this, providing those carbohydrates for those microbes because it's getting something back. If it finds that it's getting those resources, that phosphorus and those that nitrates, nitrogen and so forth, without providing anything, leaking any carbohydrates to the microbes, it's going to shut down that system, and it does. And so essentially when you provide bagged synthetic fertilizers to your crops, you're starving the organisms that otherwise would be working to produce that and get their payoff from the plants.
And the root systems are much smaller.
What's that?
Root systems are much smaller.
Yeah, you can see the root systems are much smaller. The plants are not as vigorous as they would be if that was really a natural cycle that has evolved. Cover crops basically, not only protect the soil, but continue to photosynthesize and provide more carbon into the soil, often through the late fall and pick up again sometimes in the spring, and so are one of the ways in which you can extend the season. And lastly, to diversify your crops, we rotate them, and with livestock. I mean, one of the things that we do on our farm is we raise different kinds of livestock, and we rotate them through the land and use the manure and feed the crop residues to livestock. And it just seems like nature's way is to, as much as possible, integrate livestock and plants, because they are kind of opposites, kind of the yin and yang of farming or life, and it makes sense to do that. So basically, the takeaway from all this is keep soil green, with cover crops or plants, by extending the season, keep it covered to prevent from rain, erosion, as well as oxidizing carbon to the air. Shun chemicals that destroy the microbial activity you're counting on. Use cover crops to both protect the soil and to increase the photosynthesis that's going on. Rotate with animals, diverse crops for soil health, and fundamentally minimize tillage, which is one of the worst things that we do and one of the hardest things for us to give up. So basically we're trying to create soil that you see there on the left rather than the kind you see on the right. And I'll turn it over to Julie if there are no questions about the science, last minute questions or anything about. Yeah.
I'll put this question for now. Again,
You have to speak up a little bit.
Yeah, I was wondering about ways to measure how much carbon you're putting in the soil.
It's a huge and very troublesome question. I've studied a lot of this, and my contention is we do not yet have good ways of measuring stable carbon. You can measure carbon, you can take a shovelful of soil, you can burn it, you can measure the carbon that's burnt, but that does not tell you, it tells you what was in that instant, but carbon is profligate, I guess you could say. It goes into soil rapidly, comes out of soil rapidly. The time of year, even the time of day is going to be different. And probably the only way that we could really truly measure soil carbon would be to measure something much more permanent like humus, which is, there are scientists in laboratories that are doing that and trying to equate that. But that's a very difficult process. It's a long-term thing, and it's not of interest to people who are trying to drive these carbon financing systems that pay you for increasing carbon and so forth. If you're just a farmer and you want to know whether you're doing a good job increasing carbon, that's not hard at all. But it's not going to involve labs and sending soil samples off. It's going to involve a number of tests that you can do on the farm. It's one of the things that we developed in NOFA, Massachusetts, is what we call the soil carbon proxy testing. That is, carbon is going to have a lot of proxies of its presence in soil, separate from an actual measurement of the molecule. You're going to, things like water infiltration, the color to an extent, things like, what's that?
Earthworms.
Well, earthworms, I mean, yeah, the life is supporting. We came with about 10 different simple tests that you can do in an hour or two on your farm, and we actually have a service that we offer. We go out and, somebody comes out with a penetrometer to get the soil, how is there a plow pan, is there fluidity, so that's possible. We can certainly talk more about that. We've got a lot of stuff on our website about those proxy tests, and if people are interested, we can coordinate about that. But I don't think we yet have a good device. I mean, people talk about satellite schemes where they, somehow beam something down to Earth and can tell about how much carbon is in the soil. I don't think we're there, and I don't want to spend a lot of time hoping for that until somebody actually is delivering that.
I think for growers, you can tell you have more carbon when you have better crops, and you don't have rain incidents, and you don't have drought incidents, and all that stuff.
Yeah, these proxy tests you ideally would take once a year, and you compare last year to this year. Oh yeah, great over here, and not doing so well over here, and it's very helpful. Anything else? Yeah.
So if you plow and the mycorrhizal, yeah, how long does it take for them to come back?
I'm sorry, what?
How long does it take for the mycorrhiza to come back if you plow?
Well, there are lots of ways that you can seed your soil with microbes.
But I mean, if you don't, say, without your doing anything, just if you just...
I mean, naturally, what would happen?
Yeah, how long would it naturally take for them to come back?
Well, it depends if you're it depends on your climate. If you're in a really hot, moist area, it would come pretty quickly.
Middletown.
Oh, Middletown. Well,
Middletown.
So it depends also if you're growing anything. So these guys always work with vegetation. So that's the first thing, is if it has been plowed.
Yeah, you got to provide the food.
There's much vegetation in there, and there are microbial inoculants that you can use. And you can,
I guess I mean, like if you decide to stop plowing, tilling, and you decide to do no-till,
yeah.
How long would it take for it to come back again?
How long will it take till I can be where I'm supposed to be? Well, it will start right away. And if you've got neighbors that have healthy soil, it'll be much faster than if you're in the middle of a nuclear bomb exploded or something and you got nothing to start with. But I mean, it's a natural process, and you'll be able to tell by watching the soil. I mean, a year, 2 years, 3 years. If you're actively trying to build that up after 2 or 3 years, I think you'll have a wonderful, healthy soil. And it could be faster too if you're doing. I mean, Julie will talk about some of the ways that we inoculate basically the soil with microbes.
All right,
Okay.
we'll move forward. All right. Mr. Crystal.
Yeah, sure.
So I just put this front picture up of our potato field last year, just because it was so pretty. And so healthy. And we've been, as Jack said, we started going from tillage of about 30 or so years, 37 years, 35 years, and to non-tillage for about 5 years on our farm. And we always had all the animals, and we did a lot of those wonderful things, but we kept the tillage going, and it really worked. Just kind of felt like it was just kind of, every year just trying to catch up again. And we had lots of potato bugs and lots of problems, but anyway, this is just a nice picture of how things can look when you start really getting in sync with nature. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we operate our farm, and maybe give you some ideas. But so we're certified organic, like Jack said, since 1987. We do about 3 acres of vegetables, 1 acre of fruit. We have about 7 acres of grassland, which we alternately graze cows and chickens and turkeys on, and also harvest some of that hay. So it's constant rotation there. And then 44 acres of woods. We do a Logan Labs test once a year, and one of the ways you can tell how that's going with carbon improvement, the soil organic matter is a good proxy, as Jack would say, for how your carbon is growing. And if your soil organic matter is going up every year, you're probably in a good place. But that does a kind of generally tells you how you're doing with minerals and organic matter and CEC and a few other things. So we do a little bit of mineral balancing, but I have to say we're doing less and less of putting actual minerals on the ground. Talk about what we're doing instead now. Animal integration, we raise, we don't have any cows right now, but we'll be raising 6 pigs and 100 turkeys and about 500 chickens. These guys are all integrated at some level on the farm. In the vegetables and the fruit and the hayfield pasture everywhere. So all these animals moving around all the time. Whoop.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, just thanks.
What do I have to do?
Yep, he did it already for us. We did sell our tiller. Gabe Brown always says, if you want to quit tilling, then sell your tiller. So we did. And then we got down to our road hose for a couple of years and got really strong. Last year we got a ripper, which is just a nice, we have a toolbar in the back of our tractor, and we've got these S-tines that are about this thick, and we can put a number of them on the back of the toolbar and drive over your beds, and just to make a nice thin rip for plants. And it kills some mycorrhizal fungi, but for the most part, things are still doing quite well. Tractor and rotary mower, hand mowers, road hoe is just a heavy, that's the company. If you're doing no-till, I find it's got a big, heavy hoe base on it, hoe gutter on front, and a nice maple handle, just for good handwork. Heavy usage of mulch, and we do with those 3 acres of vegetables, and our trees too. We probably get 60 to 80 round bales of hay a year that we put right on the soil, on the plants, under the plants. Fungal homemade composts, which is Korean natural farming. There are some of those, you can make those kind of fungal composts. There are also things that you can do with leaves. We're doing a lot less of that now, finding that we really just putting down all that mulch, that a lot of that fungi is coming into the system. When you're tilling, you have a more bacterially dominant situation, and that's where all the annual weeds are coming all the time, and what we want to get toward is a little more fungal dominance, which will happen if you're using mulch materials that are natural ones. Cover crops whenever possible. So in the season, as soon as plants are up and tall enough, we mulch it, and then we sow like crimson clover on top of the hay for taller things like brassicas, but potatoes, squash, tomatoes, things that can manage those kind of, another source of vegetation in there, not around our lettuces or our cilantro or our parsley or things like that. The taller plants that are And you'll find that those are really help enhance, the cover crops really help enhance fertility. In-season, pre-season, so we have a plan this year for some of our beds that aren't going to be planted until maybe June 1st. We're going to go out and broadcast oats and crimson clover in the very beginning of the season. Oats and peas, sorry. We'll do it at the beginning of the season, and then we'll just mow them down and plant through them when it's time to plant. And then post-season, as soon as we're done with the crop, or maybe before we're done, just to broadcasting and cover crops that will take you for a period until the heavy frost comes. Silage tarps, we're using a little bit of those, and we've been having them be helpful for us. Our biggest problem with our move to no-till has been grass, and it's a hard one to get rid of, and those tarps have been very helpful. Cardboard and hay or chips or leaves for killing the greenery over the winter. I'll show you some of that. Perennial strips to maximize biodiversity. So we have these 4-foot beds that we can drive our Ford 2120 over with the tractor tires. We made up, everyone's home, make a perennial bed and throw a bunch of flowers and herbs in there. And just notice that it really brings a huge more biodiversity into the system. And once you're not tilling and doing all this massive moving around of soil, it's much easier to just keep with your beds, and you can plant all sorts of things and have them work well together. And then the final thing that we do is an extensive use of liquid fertility at planting and weekly and foliar applications. And we're working with Advancing Eco Agriculture. They have a lot of nice products. If anybody ordered from the bulk order this year, they have some of their stuff in their NOFA bulk order. So this is just some pictures real quickly of how we put our animals through the fields. These are, back in the back of those, our chicken tractors that when they're in season, we move those every day. But the cows are on a vegetative land right there. And then here they are in the springtime, summertime, in the orchard actually. So this is like suitable pasture at its best, and they're eating the grass and then moving on so it's short enough that they can bring the chicken in their tractors through behind them, and they can clean up the cow manure and make use more use of the grass and also fertilize the fruit trees. So, and this is just a picture of our turkeys out. They're all going crazy right now over some comfrey. There's a little comfrey growing in this particular patch they came into, but it's just nice to show how those, various animals of various types like various things, but turkeys really love comfrey. And they're actually good at grazing, a lot better than chickens at grazing and getting a lot of value out of the grass. So then you're saving some money on feed, and also they also makes it a much richer diet than if they're just eating, the organic feed which we feed them. So, and this was just a little. Is it too bright in here? Is it okay? We could turn the lights off. Do you think we should? Maybe. Are there lights over there? Light switch. I was just what I was trying to capture. Ooh, not that way. There we go. This just shows that we have, there's like a 6.6 acre field and a little 0.4 acre and a little pathway, but the turkeys are just moving around the edges. So we were keeping them close this year because we were having a lot of coyote problems. They're very close to the house. But we're just constantly moving them around the vegetable areas, and then once the vegetables are gone, then they move into them. And here they are going through our Brussels sprouts at the end of the season. They came out for a picture. Here's a shot of some chickens after this was a corn patch that was done. Just brought these chicken tractors right down over the corn. And so we've got this nice, already the corn has brought a lot of organic matter into the system, but then the chickens come through and eat it and scratch it and just really make it really healthy. And then and then at the end of that, you can put a cover crop down there and have that really super ready for the next year. Here are the pigs in the woods. And here they are as they're getting ready to go move toward getting on the truck. Moving across the top of the garden there. And so this is our ripper bar, which was something we got in the middle of the year last year. We got in July. See these 4 rippers on here. You can put on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or how many you want and go through a field You know, it just brings up a nice strip there, and then you can plant into that. What we found, we surmised that in a lot of our fields from 2018 to 2019, when we did the soil tests, our organic matter jumped almost 2 percentage points, which is really generally unheard of. And I think what happened is because all those years of tilling, we had a nice plow pan. And these rippers were able to actually come down and cut through that plow pan a little bit, and then you have more air infiltration, water infiltration, and we saw a real upsurge in quality of the crops that were grown in there.
Julie, what is your organic matter?
It's from 9 to 12 now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. That's the road coal I was telling you about. Nice and heavy on the bottom, so it does a lot of work for you. And here, our son Dan and our son-in-law Dan, we came upon some hay from a guy who cut a bunch of hay and hadn't gotten out of the field, and it was all no good for him. He gave us those 62 round bales last fall for free. So keep an eye out for leaves and hay and whatever you can get. I mean, I think I can't say enough about mulch. You know, the microbes love it, the worms love it, the plants love it. The soil is just so happy with mulch. So here's a picture. This was 2018 and 19, where we had grass under some of these permanent trellis fences that we put up. And so we just came through and stuffed cardboard underneath that fence, and then put down, you know, copious amounts of hay on top to kill all that over the winter, which we have had good success. Two winters we've done that and had really good crops there the next year. If you wait long enough into the spring, that cardboard will have broken down, and you can just pull the hay back and plant. And I have never seen more worms move into a system than after cardboard. For some reason, I really love cardboard. So it seems like a real fertility tool. And here we are with our old, this is some other old hay that we got for reasonably cheap that we're using for mulching. And this is, you know, I think in this picture I'm just showing you how nice it can be under there. We really heavily mulched all this stuff. These particular cucumbers, oftentimes in the past, they'd be good for about a month, and then they'd get some sort of down here powdery mildew and go south. And these, you know, we harvest now, you know, the entire season essentially. We never had to go back and replant. So I think one of the things that you find with no-till and a healthier system is longevity of your crops too. You know, not just quality at the time, but longevity in the process. And here's some squash that in this case, that field we had just laid down a whole bunch of hay and cardboard, just kind of pulled it apart and then planted the squash plants in the pathways. It's all about trying to figure out smart ways to get stuff done without too much effort. And this is just to show you the kind of the mammoth amount of hay that we actually use. But we've been in this heavy hay period for, I don't know, 3 years maybe, and just the results are just rich in terms of what we, you know, the next year things are that much better than they were.
Do you have to use organic hay?
You don't. But I always, the sad thing about hay is that farmers don't put any fertilizer on their hay fields normally because they don't want to waste it on them. And so what you're doing is, I kind of feel bad because we're supporting their destruction of those hay fields. Hay fields are generally very, very poorly, are in very poor shape because farmers will go back year after year and cut hay. But anyway.
Julie, do you see much in the way of weed seeds from the hay, or is the hay so far you do something? Yeah,
there are definitely weed seeds in the hay, and it's mostly the annual weeds aren't much of a problem because when you stop tilling, the annual weeds don't get thrown up. In heavy mulch, they're not even going to grow through the hay, but what comes up is the perennial weeds. You know, thistle is a big one. We've gotten a lot of bindweed recently, which is really wraps around things and just chokes them to death. And we get a lot of dandelions, but we don't mind those because we eat those and tincture them and sell them and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's what I find. If enough mulch, the annual weeds aren't going to make it through. So this is just this is the Johnson 2 composter. It's really a glorified ring, which we threw a bunch of leaves in it and watered for a year. But we use that. We put some of that in our soil when we're starting crops. We put some down on the beds. Here's some picture of the Korean natural farming compost, which is you cook some rice, put it out in the woods for a week with a cover on it. You bring it back. You mix it's all nice and full of local not bacteria, but fungi, and mix it with some sugar, and then you let it ferment some more, and then you can make a really nice fungally rich compost. That's on the NOFA Mass website. If you ever want to look that up, Korean natural farming, we have a little kind of how to do that. So here is a picture of, I think I'm already into, I don't know why that picture there, just hold on a second, let me see. I guess I'm just showing you right now, clover over, first we put chips down. This one year we got 10 tractor trailer loads of not tractor, they're 10-wheeler trucks loads of chips, and we used a lot of chips that year as an experiment. I usually, mostly now use the chips on the perennials, of which we have many, and use the hay in the more garden spaces. But we put them down on the basil, and then we planted the crimson clover. Here you can see it coming up. There's a little grass, but not much. But you can see the quality of those basil leaves. I'm sure most of us have troubles with basil, going south pretty quickly with mildew and how mildew diseases. But you can see how rich and vibrant those leaves are with that system. And here's a picture similarly of chard with chips and then clover planted into the chips. So, the way you get that to germinate is you make sure you broadcast that clover right before a rain, and it's likely to take on top of your hay or whatever it is. And the more broken down your mulch is, the more likely it is to take. But once you get that clover under these plants that are heavy feeders, they just really go crazy and stay really strong. It's very exciting. This is a shot of some winter kill cover crops that we planted late summer. Just a nice mix of them, which is another. And to tell you the truth, this is a place that got away with us with weeds, and we mowed it down and just threw down the cover crop seed, and that's, got ahead of us last year. And here's a picture. I was out on, I think it was the 21st of September, and all of a sudden these monarch butterflies started appearing, and they all flew in. There were like 7 of them on top of these New England wild asters. But this is you saw that picture earlier with the cucumbers in the middle and the perennials along that side. This is a bed of perennials, and it just kind of shows the beauty of what you can attract to your system. And I used to have New England wild asters that were maybe this tall. You can see they're like 8-9 feet tall. And I think one of the things you start to find when you start to really grow crops to their potential is the incredible ability they have to go larger, to last longer, to have more color, have more flavor, more smell. And I don't think we don't always know what the potential is with crops until we really start to, maximize our photosynthesis. So it seems like the thing jumped on me. Is that possible that it, I don't remember, because
Can you back up and try it?
yeah, I guess I can just, I can back up from here. It seems like I don't remember why. I guess not. Okay, sorry. Hopefully I have the right one. I just wanted to talk about replanting in the season, because people say, well, how do you replant? You get all this stuff in the spring, but how do you put these into the next bed and growing again? Because in some places, if you're really intensively growing, you can get 2 or 3 crops in there. So this is preparing beds for lettuce after garlic, mowing, tarping, ripping, and planting. So here we came through with a tractor mower and then just mowed down what was left. And then we put down the tarp, which is the silage tarp. So I was just in Brian O'Hara's talk, and he was saying he really likes solarization because he can do it in one day, and he doesn't like the fact that these sit here so long. I'm not convinced that there's a whole lot of damage being done to the microbes under there because I don't think it gets quite as hot. That's part of the reason it takes as long as it does. But what I find when you take those up is that we've got a really nice, very nice front soil underneath. And here we are picking up the tarp at the end. You can see how that was another place, but this was where the garlic was, just picking it up. And you can see there's a lot of wonderful material in here that is not at all completely broken down. Nothing to worry about there. We're just folding up and showing you how to do that.
How long do you leave your silage tarps then?
Well, it depends, totally on the time of year, because if it's colder, it takes longer, and if it's warmer, it's a shorter period of time. So I think 3 weeks maybe on when it's really hot in July maybe, but you know, more like 4, 5, 6 depending. And then Claire came through with the ripper on the tractor and just made those rows there. And then here we are with those 3 beds ripped. And then the guys are planting lettuce seedlings. So we can easily, what we found with that, you can kind of see how it's really nice and crumbly here. And again, we have a really high organic matter and it's really healthy. But you can plant into a lot of so-called trash, the little lettuce plants like that, and have them come out really nicely. And here's a picture, a little more of them, and we just plant them 1 foot on center. And then those are them as they got bigger. So just a little showing of some succession planting. And here they are, just closer to. All right. So priorities, according to John Kemp, who is the guy who runs AEA, the Advancing Eco Agriculture. Anybody listen to his podcasts? Anybody here listen to those? No? Yeah, one person. Yeah. I would, if I were you, if you really want to get educated about everything you always wanted to know and didn't even think about with soil fertility, and he's just a master of this. He's a young Amish farmer. He's been at this, I think he might be 32 now, but he's been at it for at least 20 years with his company. He's a savant for sure. He knows so much, and he's really done so much research, has developed his own products, but he has these educational webinars and podcasts, and if you go to that Advancing Eco Agriculture site, you can sign up for those, and you can go and listen to all the old ones too. Just a huge amount of information there. So here's some things to be thinking about. And again, I wanted to just, he's about trying to help farmers make money, and he's doing a very good job of that. He's working with conventional farmers who are changing their practices, not because they're trying to save the world or because they want to be organic, or not even necessarily because they want to sequester carbon, just because they want to make money, And that's a good driver if this works and it does all those things at once. But so these are things to think about when we're wanting to consider being a good farmer or a gardener, is that we have to have adequate water. So that doesn't mean, okay, I've got to get a hose out there and do an inch every week. It means that we have to have water in the system. And then, one of these ways that we understand that happens is when you have a higher organic matter, you will have more, you'll have more water holding capacity in your soil. And the stronger, the healthier it is, the more you have just the amount of water you need. If it's a dry season, you're going to be able to pull from there. If it's a wet season, it's going to suck it up. And for example, we used to do drip tape on all of our beds, 3 acres of beds. We've taken it all out, and we don't use any drip tape any longer. We water things in when we plant them, and that's that. We just don't have to worry about that again. Were you going to say something? No. Adequate CO2 to have adequate active photosynthesis. So there's a lot of carbon dioxide exchange underneath the canopy of the plants, and you might have to explain this if I screw this up. But they really need a lot of carbon dioxide, and so near the soil, level. We have to have that. And that's made available by litter. It's made available by active photosynthesis and really healthy plants. And there's this constant feedback from the soil up to the plant and back again. Is that accurately stated?
Yeah, basically, I mean, the microbes, if you have a healthy soil, there are a lot of microbes, and they're living, and they're existing, and they're breathing, and they're exhaling carbon dioxide. So on a warm day in your field, you will, those microbes will come alive, eat breakfast, have a healthy day, and be exhaling a lot of carbon dioxide. So if you measure your carbon dioxide between the morning and the evening, you'll find different levels, much more in the evening. If you measure it a foot from the ground or 10 feet from the ground, you also find sometimes as much as 10 times as much carbon dioxide in that first foot, because that's where it's being exhaled by the microbes, and you're getting a lot there. And fortunately, that's also where the bottoms of a lot of plant leaves are, because the holes, the stomata, which is the mechanism by which the plants intake that carbon dioxide, is on the bottom of their leaves. So isn't it nice how nature's worked all that out, so it just works so simply.
But anyway, that's what we're wanting to have, actually, is carbon dioxide near the soil surface. Adequate sunshine. So another thing to think about with sunshine is, yeah, we want to be out planting in the, in the sun as opposed to in the shade. But one of the things that the plants, as they get healthier, they will put on more leaves, and they'll put more angles on their leaves, and they put out these trichomes, which are little hairs that you'll see on a really healthy plant. And so they can maximize their photosynthesis themselves. You'll see a sunflower, of course, will actually face the sun all day long, move back and forth. But that's happening with your green plants too. And so, making use of the sunshine. Here's another thing that's important. So you want to support photosynthesis and minimize photorespiration. So there's a point when you go out in the field and you see things that are all like this. That's photorespiration. They have stopped working for the day, and they're saying, okay, I gotta take a break because I can't handle this any longer, and they're actually conserving their water. But if you, it seems, John says that he has seen, and I certainly have seen this on our farm, that when you have a healthy plant, plant can tolerate, he says that at 86 degrees, I think, is where plants normally will start to photorespire as opposed to photosynthesize. And that if you have a really healthy plant system, you can gain almost 6 degrees on that. So they can, same plants, kind of plants up in different field where it's really healthy, they can make it to 92 before they start to photorespire. The other side of that is, at frost time, they can tolerate much more cold. And again, those are things that we've noticed with really healthy plants. So maximizing that photosynthesis and minimizing photorespiration is a real priority. Foliar minerals as needed, and we want to particularly promote photosynthesis with nitrogen, magnesium, iron, and manganese. And then biological inoculants to the root system, and cover crops, and then mineral amendments in the soil. So that's what he says. We've been kind of taught, I think, I was taught, got to get out there and put down lots of minerals on the soil, right? That's the first thing we do. He says that's really number 6. These other things are much more important than that. Okay. And so just to talk a little bit about the photosynthesis process, and we have magnesium in the center of the atom, and then 4 nitrogen atoms around, 4 nitrogen around that. And then iron, which is not a part of chlorophyll, but he talks about wrenches and coenzyme factors. Iron is needed in order to build the enzymes that will help with that process of photosynthesis. Manganese is needed for hydrolysis, which is the initial time when you split that H2O to H and O. Without manganese, you aren't going to be able to adequately support photosynthesis. Manganese is a particularly limiting factor, particularly in New England soils, as is iron, believe it or not. You might have a lot of iron in your soil here. I have seen a lot of red in Connecticut, but it's often not available because we don't have a really active soil microbiology. So those are things to consider, making sure that they're available, particularly the iron and manganese. And then Photomag is the AEA product I use for that, so that's just a little note on that. And then we use all of these different recipes from AEA. I actually worked with this is my second year working with a consultant there. I thought I was going to get charged, but actually I didn't get a bill last year. I just, I buy their stuff, and I guess that's good enough for them. So back working with him again. Nathan Harmon is his name. He's the best. If you want to call him up and say, I want to work with Nathan. But he gives me a list of all the things we need to do, our various liquids and such. And if you're interested in those recipes, if you're into really wanting to really maximize on your farm or garden, feel free to email me and I can send you our recipes that are, for our system. That gives you a sense. So I just wanted to show. So here's something that we have found when we started using wood chips probably 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of wood chip mulch. All of a sudden in the last 2 years, we have these white cap mushrooms everywhere on the farm. So every morning I'd say, Mario, go out and get some mushrooms. We'd fry them up with our eggs in the morning. This is right outside the house, right? But here's a crate of them. Beautiful mushrooms that we probably harvested 200 or 300 pounds of them under all of our fruit trees. Everywhere, basically, wherever we have mulch. But to me, it's a sign that there's a lot of wonderful stuff happening when you start getting mushroom bodies all over the place. And then the little tiny ones that you touch them and they kind of, in the morning, people have those little tiny little ones out in your fields. That's a good sign. If you have mushrooms coming up everywhere, you're in that city. So this is just a little picture that, again, you'll see a lot of structure to these plants. They can more actively photosynthesize when there's more surface area and good color on that spinach. And our strawberries, really good this past year. Peas, this is a sign, you can see how many beautiful flowers we have on these peas. And also you'll see the tendrils are just really well developed. All these plants are just extremely well developed. But this is when you have enough manganese in your system, you're going to get lots and lots of flowers. And your plants will be stronger and sturdier so they can tolerate all those flowers, which basically turn into children later for them. And this is a picture of the wall of peas that were 8 feet tall this last year. Those are sugar snaps. So over the top of our trellises, essentially. And then just loaded with peas. Lettuce plants we were getting, on average, 1 to 1.5 pounds each. And then really well filled out cucumbers. That is that picture again, just to show, a little bit of that biodiversity to that perennial strip in there that really helped make that system really hum. The noise of the pollinators whenever we go out to pick cucumbers was just phenomenal, just with all those around. And then more chard. I really felt that the chard tasted a little bit like beefsteak this year. It was that, that hearty. So you start really mineralizing your plants and letting them do their full potential, then you can really start to have really tasty food. And shot of kale. You can see dandelions over here. We just go along and pick, kind of pick up their leaves and chop them off and sell those too. Dandelions are extremely healthy for you. Actually, I had a CSA member who said that his favorite vegetable was the dandelions. I was very excited about that. And then some other kinds of lacinato kale. You can see the really beautiful coloring and also the nice ridges on there that are going to, provide for more photosynthesis. And beets without all that beet leaf miner and all the scuds that you get on beets and chard. And then those are those potatoes again, which as I said, we didn't have a single potato beetle this year. And we just, I'll show you the next spot. That's just one hill. So we just would go and pull the plants out, so it was really loose and got that much per hill. And this is just showing a broccoli plant that is very large, but not yet, not ready putting up its flower, its head. And that's what you want really plants to do, is to really build, and they will do that when they have adequate calcium, among other things. And so they have a beautiful frame, and then they're able to do whatever it is they do. You know, if it's a broccoli, or if it's a pea plant, or a tomato plant. You don't want them reproducing until they've gotten really strong, and then they can really do a much better job. This is basil this year, just healthy looking. And peppers, these pepper plants were just, I've never seen quite so many peppers on a plant in my life. Every single one of them is like that. Really well formed. And this is just a little, I like the step size of the celery and the tomatoes and the beans in the background. And here it is a little bit later. Celery plants, just, one of our accounts this year said, wow, the celery, you know, it was the best thing they'd ever had. It was so sweet. It's, again, understanding what a plant can do and then having it really do that for you. And these monstrous stalks, looking like California, only tasting a lot better. And some radishes at the end of the season. And this is our parsley patch, which was just out of this world also. And then you can see those carrots are just really very super healthy. None of that scuzz you get on the alternaria acid on your leaves. You know, just really healthy leaves all the way up too. So there's very few bugs, very few diseases, and just really super tasty crops. Just a shot of stuff getting ready to go to the CSA. And so our big problem with our peaches this year was that there were too many of them, and we had boards propping them all up everywhere to keep these poor branches from breaking. But this was just really by using these targeted sprays and really getting super productivity from the peaches. So, up in the tree picking them, and there you can see really nice quality. And these apples, we had 2 years of serious gypsy moths came through and just decimated our apples and our blueberries. And this is this year with, you know, we started to put together this food spraying program, which is really important for, if you're trying to raise fruit, that's the one you have to really work hard for. Vegetables are hard and fruit is that much harder. But we're starting to get apples back of decent quality. And there's some grapes. And there's some honey. We actually have our first decent crop of honey, enough for our household from one little hive this year, which is exciting. So dirty laundry, grass, when not enough mulch or when land was dirty the year before, and bindweed. Those are two things that really were hard for us this year. There's some broccoli that never got weeded. There's some weeds in there too. You see a lot of grass. And here's the bindweed that was growing up things. So we have to, that's one of our struggles yet. And you know, I find that every year it's like, oh, we learned this many things and we have this much more to learn. Every year a new way of doing things. So I just want to go back for a minute though, because if anybody did go to Brian's talk, and a lot of people think that compost is necessary to be in a no-till system. And although I showed you that one big barrel with leaf compost, and we have, you know, a little pile of the other fungal compost, we don't really use compost on our farm, so it's not necessarily necessary. I feel that if you're putting in lots of mulch, if you're growing your cover crops, if you're photosynthesizing with your plants really well, and again, we take our animals through too, which is another thing. A lot of people don't have animals and don't do that. In our system, we find that we don't need compost. We just bring everything in there and you know, don't haul stuff out and then bring it in. It's all, animals go through, they clean off eat up the plants that were there, and we build the fertility naturally every year. Food preservation, you know, one of the side benefits of, and again, you can see how healthy these beans are, and I've raised a lot of shitty beans in my life, all sorts of disease on them, and we still have a little bit of Mexican bean beetle, we're working on that. But you can start to see some really nice crops. And there's that apple tree that I showed you. That amongst a few others, we ended up making 300 quarts of applesauce this year, so that was a real treat. This was there was a period in September where Monday, Wednesday, Friday we'd like harvest give to the CSA, sell stuff, and it's like, okay, this is what we have to do this afternoon. Preserve all that stuff. So it was pretty crazy. Oh. Thank you. And there's our hemp. 5 of those we can you do that in Connecticut? Can you raise hemp now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And our cover crops. I just wanted to show this little picture. This was late after several frosts on our deck. We had flower boxes, and this one, for some reason, some clover grew up in it, and I left it. And you see they're starting to get a little ratty. They have been frozen several times. I mean, frosted. But this another box, 2 boxes over. This is the same day, and that's what those look like. They were just there was no clover in that box. So I said, okay, lesson learned. Get out there and get some more clover in those fields. All that nice mulch. Around tomatoes, like I said, around brassicas, around corn. There are a lot of things that you can use cover crops and really to your benefit. Also, this is a video I did, and I don't know if we can. Does anybody know how to make that run? Can you push a button, push a thing there, maybe? No, it doesn't work.
Spacebar?
Oh, spacebar? Do you think maybe try one of these things here? Can you back it up again? Oh, I have to do that. Right. Sorry. What this does? No? Yeah, we didn't know if we could make it work. I was just talking about the soil, but here's that. If you remember that picture way back of those summer cover crops that we had planted, this is where they died down to. And then we're on this beautiful scenic road, and there are oaks not so far away, and they all dropped their leaves down here on top of here. Plus there was some leftover hay from before. But this was taken a couple days ago, and this whole field, I'm happy to say, after a few years of trying to end up with that, all those things that Jack talked about, keeping the soil covered, especially over winter. This is a nice area where all that stuff died down, and I was able to just pull away the leaf matter, and it's ready for planting now. So that's what we're looking for. So yeah, multi-species winter kill cover crops, late August to late September. I think if there's anything that you can take away from this, it's like big use of cover crops whenever you can. Intersown crimson clover, and shorter cover crops early in the brassicas, etc. Before the season starts, if you know you're going to plant tomatoes here, or squash, or corn, or whatever things later, who knows when the season's going to start. It might be tomorrow, maybe we're going to have some snowstorms, I'm not sure, but as soon as it seems like it's possible to plant, I would get out there and broadcast in some oats and peas for areas that are going to be not planted until here. Using stylish tarps strategically through the season for succession crops, cardboard and hay over winter, leaves, hay, wood chips, and whatever else you can find for natural mulches. I do not like plastic mulch. I do not like any of that, putting that down the landscape fabric. A lot of people do that because they want to have a clean area. But when you put those things down, you're not, not allowing the microbes to have anything extra to eat. There's a great book that you might want to read if you haven't, called Mycorrhizal Planet by Michael Phillips, and he talks a lot about how those mycorrhizal fungi operate, and they need food. The bacteria needs food. All those microbes need food, and when you have, big areas of plastic, under your tomatoes or whatever you do, you're not giving them that opportunity. You're not maximizing your opportunity to feed microbes and make them healthier, basically. Animals in rotation, ripper bar, and moderation. Again, I think, we only had it for half the season. I think it did break up the plow pan. I think we're going to be very judicious with the use of that, so we're not out there, just basically tilling. And then well-targeted foliar sprays and drenches. So those are some things to think about. And then, these are just some quotes from people. I had one week, I had 2 people say, it was just like Christmas. So people very excited about the food. Even old members of the CSA saying, wow, things have gotten much better since even last year. New members just being blown away by the flavor of the food. and feeling better. I had a woman this other day say, who's my age, she went to the eye doctor a year before she had gone, and they said, well, your eyes are holding firm. That's really not likely in your age. And she said, well, I think it's because of the vegetables I eat all summer long. So, you know, good food makes for healthy people. That's it. Yeah, that's it. So we have 10 minutes for questions and comments. Yeah.
You mentioned that you don't really have any Colorado potato fields. How have you managed to do that? That's really difficult.
Isn't it amazing? It was like...
Usually our worst best.
Usually it's like, oh, turn your head when you go buy the potatoes, right? Oh, again, I can't face it, you know? It's just by continually building that fertility, and, you know, I do think that all the things we do, but then on top of that, making sure we have those weekly foliars to support photosynthesis. And if you can support those plants to grow as healthily and as fast and as luxuriantly as possible, not luxuriant like in too much nitrogen, but really luxuriant as in really strong and sturdy, they build on their, if you've seen John Kemp's, he has a pyramid, health pyramid, where you build complex carbohydrates, and then you build complex proteins in plants, and then you start to build the
Fats.
Fats, right, the fats and oils, and those are really important. Fats are like on a broccoli plant, though you'll see in the brassicas, you'll see that they get really waxy sheen on them. And all of a sudden, they can't, you know, a floating fungi that's coming in to kill it, they basically have teeth. They can't get in. Their teeth can't get in because it's too, you know, it's too strong, too sturdy for them. And then the final thing, when you have a really healthy plant, is then you'll have the plant secondary metabolites, all the flavors, all the smells, you know, all these things that are just make them really super plants. So that's what it's about. It's about building really sturdy leaf structures. And then when these insects, as John and many other people before him would say, are nature's garbage collectors. And they come into a situation when a plant is sick. And it's their job to take that plant out and kill it. Just like if a person is sick and, you know, dies of a disease, essentially the microbes are there to clean up. And, you know, that's their job, is to, or get rid of a dead animal or whatever it is. You know, all these things work in nature. And so those kind of insects that come in to eat your plants are doing it once they're, you know, they've gotten the picture, and they say a lot of that comes from being able to see them, the light waves, the infrared. They can see basically when a plant is flashing, you know, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick. They can see that. That's when they come into a situation and actually will take that plant out. So interesting stuff. That might be a little mind-blowing, but it's kind of exciting when you see what you can do.
I think it was our best illustration of the fact that healthy plants have their defense systems, and we don't really understand them, but healthy plants are not going to have those problems.
And I think the other thing is you can see, so like our peaches still have a little brown rot, and although they didn't have, 2018 they had a lot of brown rot, 2019 was very significantly less. The apples are still getting some insect problems on them, so it means we're not there with some of those crops. And then that's where we said, oh, then we're going to target that and do a better job with that one, figure out how to do that. Well, one of the things I want to say under the fruit trees that we're going to do this year is we already put down lots of cardboard and then hay on top in a mulch around the fruit tree, but we're going to get out there and plant crimson clover and oats, I think, right in the mulch around the fruit trees, so that there you can have that nice understory for the beneficials to come in. So, all the ways you think of, yeah.
I can't remember, I think you might have said it, but I know your son said it in a workshop, Dan, that if you have the ratio in the soil, for your question about fungi versus bacteria, if it's more heavily, the fungus is greater, then you get less insect damage. And we tend to have soil that's more bacteria dominant because we keep tilling it.
Right, yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know if I know that that is particularly true. I do know that the bacteria down in soils are going to give you lots of annual weeds. And it's a sign of disruption. Annual weeds come in because, again, nature says, listen, we have to stay clothed here. This is how this world is going to survive if everything's clothed. And, you know, they're our friends. So are the invasive plants. Invasive plants, you know, everybody's like, oh, we're going to do all these invasives. Well, they're trying to save us, you know. They can photosynthesize so fast, they can put on so much material, and they're just doing their part to bring the world back to where it needs to be. So when you start thinking about these things a little differently, what is nature telling me here? And the nature's telling us with this incredible influx of invasives everywhere, is that we got a problem here, and, you know, she's doing her best to help us get through it.
Has the deep mulching created any problems with moles, voles, that sort of thing?
And slugs.
Moles.
And
voles,
slugs.
You said, okay.
I forgot to tell you about the slugs. Moles and voles, yes. 2 dogs and 4 cats. And that's really how we deal with those. And the slugs, one of the things that I'm working with on AEA is this, they have a theory that more iron in your soil, in your plants, will help them with the slugs. We had less slugs last year than the year before, but we still have slugs. And I think I'm going to get some rock dust this year, and just actually around those plants that tend to get the slugs, just, you know, use it as kind of a mulch, not that thick, but it's the same as like putting down ashes or diatomaceous earth or whatever. But then you're also going to be building. So yes, we're struggling with that still.
Yeah.
Forgot to mention it. Sorry. Yeah.
So when you made the switch to going no-till, did you change what varieties of crops you were growing to, you know, things that like having a little bit more pressure?
No. No, not really. It was the same stuff. But we started harvesting more dandelions. And this year I'm going to harvest more thistle because I know it's good for you. I just haven't read up enough on it to figure out the. And more tinctures. Yellow dock, we make a lot of yellow dock tincture and dandelion root tinctures, and you know, those are powerful plants. Perennials are powerful plants. Comfrey, we have that all over the farm. You know, good stuff. Any other questions?
Yeah. For you mentioned you don't use any black plastic. I'm just curious what you do for peppers. At least we find that you need to use it for the peppers to get the heat up.
Yeah, no. I mean, I never could get any peppers in the past, ever. And sometimes I'd get big plants without peppers. And you saw that picture. The plant was just, it was compact. It was good size, but it had, you know, 25 peppers on it.
You just do it with mulch, and because you got the soil up.
And what's that?
Because you got your 10% organic matter in the soil.
Yeah, I mean, that's really been helpful.
Right.
You know, peppers were something I never could get in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we found that we still have to do black plastic. It's the only thing we do on black plastic.
Yeah. Well, why don't you try, if you try some of these things this year, you know, do one side by side and see what happens. Yeah, I used to use black plastic on peppers too. Other questions?
I'm just curious on if, did you have any leafhopper problems on potatoes at all?
Yeah.
No.
What would you recommend for potato varieties that are work well for you?
I like yellow ones. I love Corolla. I love, shoot, what's the other? Maybe call out some yellow names. Yellowfin. Is that what's Yellowfin? Is that it? We just have yellow ones now because we like the taste of them the best.
Okay.
And we save them all, then we get them all mixed up, and so then we have a clue which one's what. But back in the day, I remember liking Corolla. I like, there's a late yellow one. I've forgotten the name of it too. I just, you know, it's like they're in the root cellar. I don't remember their names anymore. Yeah, no, it's fun. Do you grow a lot of potatoes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it maybe Yukon Gem?
Yukon Gold.
Yukon Gold.
I don't like Gem as well as Gold, but you know what we're going to do this year? We have this whole field, 4/10 of an acre, and one of the which is what we basically did last year, except we didn't have the ripper at the beginning of the season. We're just going to go down a 4-foot bed and rip one ridge, you know, one hole through, and drop them about maybe every foot in the bed. And then cover them, and then the first, as they come up, just hill them a little bit, and then just mulch the hell out of them. We might plant some clover, I don't know if I will or not, but that's just what we did last year, and it worked really well. So, you know, and then as you do it, and if you plant, you have to really, really deep, as you know, because they will green up, they'll pop up and stuff, but we find with one hilling, and we do that with that row hoe, rather than try to use any machinery. We don't really have, we have a tractor, and that's basically it, rotary mower. It goes on, and now the ripper on the back of that, but mulching really, really heavily really works. And get some cats and dogs to eat all the moles.
But if you're organically certified, they don't let you run your cats and dogs on your beds.
They don't?
Yeah.
I don't know. We haven't gotten in trouble yet.
But they don't know.
How can you stop them?
Yeah.
You have to sign a piece of paper that says you're not doing it.
No, not with Bay State, who certifies in Mass and
that's what I
Connecticut.
do.
Well, I actually worked with Bay State. I did it 2 years ago.
You're on their radar now.
Are you Lawrence?
Rachel.
Oh, Rachel.
Yeah,
Great.
I came with Don 2 years ago.
Oh, you did to our place. Oh, you were a student then, right?
I was training.
A trainee, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. You made it through.
I mean, if they're not pooping in your beds, we're not going to care. But if we don't see it, we're not going to.
Yeah. Bay State's very, very practical and very reasonable, I find.
Thank you.
Yes. So, if that's it for questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Feel free to